First on stage, I would like to welcome Professor Sushi Suzuki from the Kyoto Institute of Technology on stage, who will be talking a little bit about the history of sugar, ME310, and design thinking. Welcome, Sushi.
Thank you, Daniele. All right, always have to check. Can you guys see the slide with the nice cloud picture? Perfect, we're at the right place. Second question, how much time do I have?
45 minutes.
45 minutes instead of an hour. All right, so I need to talk 30% faster. Anyways, yeah, thanks for having me here, and it's really good to get GKO going again, even if we're kind of stuck in our homes for some of us. So a while back when we were planning for this GKO, Maya asked me if I could talk about a little bit of like where this all comes from, both design thinking, ME310, which some of you may have heard of, and of course, the sugar network. I think she was seeing it more as kind of like an introduction to design thinking, but I've kind of misinterpreted it as like, since I've been around for a while, like, Sushi, can you be the historian? Which is why I put on the slide, like, this is the presentation that makes me feel old. But I just jumped into this because it's something that I was curious about, like putting together as well. Then I was kind of thinking, like, what does this actually matter for you as a student going into this? And I realized the goal I wanted to have with this is putting your existence into context, which is actually saying a little bit too much because I'm not going into how your father met your mother and things like that. But it's really more about putting into context what you're about to get into, this 9 months project, all these universities together. How did it happen? How did it come together? And why is it happening now as well? So I have a couple disclaimers on here. As with so many things, history is never accurate. Part of this is stuff that I have lived through by being part of it. Part of it is things that I have heard from a lot of the people I'm connected to or friends with in the sugar network. And part of it is from things I've studied through articles and books. So already in here, you'll probably realize that some of the stuff I'm going to say probably is conflicting with Falk, which is where I was kind of looking at Falk's presentation, being like, this is going to get interesting. The second disclaimer is that I'm actually not 100% sure if this is best presented now. I feel like you actually get more of this to absorb after you finish the program. But at Expo, it's all about you guys, and there's no real time to do a keynote or anything like that. So we'll do it now, and hopefully it sticks. I know you guys want to jump into your project, but bear with me for a bit. So who am I? I actually was in your seat 16 years ago. I was part of a program, sugar doesn't exist yet, part of a program called ME310, which is kind of the founding program of sugar, or like the inspiration for sugar, let's say, at Stanford University when I was a master's student there. And we were working with the Technical University of Munich and with BMW to improve the open air experience of convertibles, which was awesome because they actually gave us a convertible to work on for a year in sunny California. We had to give it back. This project, or we became famous for two things. One is that we took this perfectly good new convertible and drilled a hole in the windshield to see if what we're trying to do will actually work. I think the case study is on the Stanford website if you want to learn more about it. And it actually did work, and the final prototype looks a lot better than that. The second one of why we became really famous was we probably set the record for the most number of times being pulled over by cops. When you have a car with a hole in the windshield, police do not leave you alone, and we got pulled over a lot. But luckily, none of us went to jail or anything serious happened. So since then, I've been in some of the shoes of the people watching here. I was actually a teaching assistant the next year. Then a couple years later, I came back as a executive director, which sounds a lot bigger than it is. My job was actually to coordinate projects with partners and hunt for projects, as well as coordinate with different universities as well. After that, I actually went to ENPC Paris. So I'm guessing, are there French people here today? I can't, of course, see raised hands. But before D-School Paris existed, I got recruited by the person who was the founder to come start ME310 there. So I went over to be an instructor for 2 years. I was in industry for a while, but managed to actually sponsor a project when I was working at Panasonic between Paris and HPI. And since 2015, I am now at the real KIT, or KIT Japan, teaching there and doing the project. So a little bit of a timeline on everything I'm going to talk about. Actually, I'm not going to go into industrial design. That's kind of like the background of it. But the three things I wanted to focus that was on the title was design thinking, ME310, and sugar. And well, let's just jump into design thinking. So design thinking is one of those things that feels really, really new. But once you read into it, you realize like there's a lot of people that were doing this stuff right after the war in the 1950s. I'm actually not going to cover this part because A, it'll require way too much time that we don't have, and B, I'm actually not up to date on it myself. But this is the era when people were really thinking about what's the best way of design, and words like design science or visual design or things like that were coming up. And if you're interested, here are the people who are really like pushing the envelope in this era, like Herbert Simon or Buckminster Fuller. Instead, I'm going to focus on the second part that is probably closer in lineage to the kind of design thinking that we're going to be doing. I kind of call it the modern day design thinking movement, which starts with the IDEO, the design consultancy. I'm guessing some of you have probably heard about them as you're in the Sugar program and maybe you've seen case studies. If you haven't, chances are you probably will throughout the project. But both IDEO and the Stanford D School can really starts with this person, David Kelly, who founded IDEO. So it's kind of interesting seeing his background. He was actually an engineer coming from Carnegie Mellon in the East Coast. And after being an engineer, he got this wonderful engineering job where he was making laboratory science for Boeing. And that's kind of what made him say, screw it, I want to do something else, because he didn't want to design toilet science. And came out to Stanford to be part of their master's in product design program. And while at it, he actually took ME310. This is something I discovered through my research the last couple of weeks. After he graduated with his master's, he founded David Kelly Design, which is the precursor to IDEO. So he kind of started his own consultancy to work on projects that he wanted to. And then he actually attempted a PhD under Professor Larry Leifer, which we'll talk about, and you probably heard his name earlier as well, but he actually never finished, which makes me feel a bit more comfortable because I also started a PhD under Professor Leifer and never actually finished. In 1990, he actually became a tenured professor at Stanford University after teaching for a long time. And then the year after, he actually, that's when IDEO was started as a combination of actually different design firms that, along with David Kelly. I think some of you may have heard of Bill Mogridge, who also ran Mogridge and Associates. And then in 2005, he founded the Stanford D School. So IDEO, this is very much like at the core of where the modern day design thinking movement has started. For those of you that don't know, it's a design and innovation consultancy in Palo Alto, California, part of Silicon Valley, right outside of Stanford. And they are been really very well known for both their innovative work and for focusing on methodologies of coming up with new ideas, new concepts, and new products. So maybe the case study that you have seen is a video or a TV show that covered IDEO trying to redesign the shopping cart back in, I want to say 99 or 98. And in it, they really kind of highlighted the way they're working of not just trying to design something that's good, but actually going out there, doing field research, going to shopping malls and talking to experts or photographing and videotaping how people are using it, and then coming up with these really rough prototypes to think of their ideas and test their concept. And this was very different back in the day when design consultancies were generally seen more as a form-giving consultancy. So, hey, I have a new idea for this great toaster. Could you guys try to figure out a good design for it that fits into our brand image as well? That was more of the typical kind of design. I'm going to say now design consultancies around the world are adopting the IDEO methodologies. They are also doing a lot more fuzzy front end work. Like it's a much different landscape than what it was back then. The other thing he is very well known for is starting the D School, also known as the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. Now, this is where I really jump into hearsay because I wasn't there. But the story that I heard was that in 2004, IDEO was featured in Business Week. Around the same time, Hasso Plattner, the founder of SAP, was looking for some inspiration and came across this article. Apparently he read it one morning and decided this was it. This is what SAP needed to incorporate into their business, and like presented it that afternoon to the entire company in his speech. And then after that, made an appointment with David Kelly, and through conversation decided to fund the D School at Stanford. And of course, after that, also fund the D School at the Hasso-Plattner Institute, HPI in Potsdam as well. And I was fortunate enough to actually be there around the time when this was all starting out. This was the napkin manifesto that they created to say, okay, this is what we stand for. Design thinking, of course, being there as well. But as an educational institute, they were also focusing on innovators, not innovation, which I found really, really cool. And another thing that I really like what they do is that they follow the students. So whatever the students are interested in, they try to create programs around it. And of course, other things we're used to, like radical collaboration was in there as well. So this is a kind of a famous picture from the early years of the D School back when it was not in the current building. Couple things that really distinguish them is that they're open to all students. They're actually not a department or a school at all, but it's where students and professors from different departments get to come in and teach classes there. I think they have a rule that for every class they teach, they have to have professors from different departments teaching it, so that it doesn't become another mechanical engineering class or another law class. They have this mentality that everything is a prototype. During the last decade, like every time I went to Stanford, the D School looked completely different because they always treated their space as a prototype. And with this kind of thinking, they have this mentality that the kind of innovator they're trying to raise or they're trying to grow is someone that has this very deep expertise in something that's not design thinking. It could be mechanical engineering, could be business, it could be software programming or computer science. Like, I'm sure you guys are all in a field that's not design thinking that you're trying to become an expert in. And they see that design thinking is this sort of broad capability that gets added on to someone with this skill or in-depth knowledge that you're usually getting for university. So whenever I see these kinds of new universities that are coming up with a degree in design thinking, sometimes I wonder if that's really the right way of going about it. I don't think that's the case for anyone in the network here. Couple of the things that they're famous for, it's a little bit outdated because some of the case studies I've dug out a long time ago, but Pulse was a startup that got started in one of the classes there called Launchpad, which was literally just like start a company in 10 weeks. And the cool story I heard about these is that this was around the time the iPad came out. So the team wanted to create some kind of like a newspaper app that would aggregate these news and whatnot and make it look nice. But because they're students, they didn't have an office. So what they ended up doing was just sitting in a cafe in Palo Alto programming. And whenever they're done with a version, they walk around the cafe, find someone who looked like they have time, show the app, get some feedback, and then go back to coding again, which is very much this like lean methodology that is talked about now. We don't hear about it now because it got bought out by LinkedIn a few years later, but it's definitely one of the bigger case studies. Another one, maybe you have seen a TED Talk by the founder, Janet Chen, I believe is her name. It's called Embrace Warmer, which is a baby incubator that can be basically made for a couple $100s instead of like the $10,000 machines that are out there. And it started from a class called Design for Extreme Affordability, or like Design for the other 90% of the world. It's basically where students work with NGOs from developing countries to develop new products. And I believe this one was in Nepal, but the students end up creating a company around it and actually delivering these products to it. And what's really cool is that this baby incubator doesn't use any electricity. You can just warm it up from hot water and it'll keep the temperature for a very, very long time. So Stanford has become very well known for design thinking, but design there is a little bit messy. I've drawn this a long time ago, but there's the School of Engineering, Mechanical Engineering, and Design group. And what you're about to get into started from ME310, which is actually a course inside of the design group and the engineering department. In addition to that, they have their research arm, which is the Center for Design Research. D School is technically outside of it because they're inclusive of all the different ones, but because this is so complicated, everyone I talk to thinks ME310 is actually part of the D School, especially because they share the same building. In addition to that, they have a separate design program, which is a joint thing between engineering and art department, which I found out a couple of years ago. They got sort of taken apart, rebuilt as the Design Impact Masters. So if you guys are looking into sort of continuing with a master's program, that's something that is pretty well known as well. And one thing I want you to notice here is that they actually don't have a design department. The closest thing they have is an art department. And now they have things like biodesign as well, which is very much kind of design thinking oriented, but in a very different part of the university as well. Anyways, enough talking about Stanford. Let's talk design thinking. So I was kind of trying to jump into article and see where the terminology actually came from in the way that we use now. And it was very much David Kelly and IDEO people trying to distinguish themselves from the word design as what still most people see it, of these like pretty lines or cool forms or a very sleek iPhone case. Okay, this one's not very good, but they wanted to sort of focus on more the process or the methodology aspect of it. And by putting the word thinking, they were hopefully trying to separate themselves from all the design consultancies that they were working with. Tim Brown, the CEO of IDEO for almost the last 20 years now, he wrote this in, I believe, Harvard Business Review. Design thinking can be described as a discipline that uses the designer's sensibility and methods to match people's needs with what is technologically feasible and what a viable business strategy can convert into customer value and market opportunity. And maybe you've seen these kinds of diagram where you have like this true innovation in the middle of business, people, technology, with design thinking coming from the people side. Looks very clean, right? Though personally, I feel like it's oversimplifying it a little bit. And I find that this definition is a little bit client-oriented, kind of a way to explain what they do to people who will ultimately be hiring their services. And my personal belief along with a lot of people that I worked with at Stanford, is that there's really no one way of defining design thinking. And that is both a problem and a good thing. There are so many process diagrams out there. This was the first official, I don't know if I want to say official, but like first process diagram that the Stanford D School put out maybe like 14 years ago or so, which had understand, observe, point of view, ideate, prototype, test, with these whirly lines going everywhere. And I think what they wanted to show that it's what these individual elements, or the fact that you cover it, is what's important rather than how you move between them. I think this confused people more than it actually. Tim Brown wrote, this was a diagram from his Harvard Business Review, where he had this inspiration, ideation, implementation framework, which sounds really nice with the 3 I's. And then he showed how like a project at IDEO might go back and forth between each one. Maybe you've seen this circular diagram. Some people call it like the ME310 process diagram, of like starting with the problem and then having the brainstorming, prototyping, testing, maybe user need finding, etc. I've been really intrigued with this one because I come from this world as well, but there's also been unbelievable amounts of like copycats or something that looks very similar to it. And this was just like page 1 and 2 of Google image search. And the reason I'm really interested in this one is because I actually came up with it one day back in 2007 when I was invited to talk to a panel at Kagawa University in Japan. And this was a slide I created to explain what we do in ME310 and Stanford IDEO. And I call it the Stanford IDEO design process. compared to now, I would say that back then, not many people were drawing these process diagrams or like were so focused on it. And I just kind of drew it up without realizing like how much this would spread around thanks to ME310. You notice it actually changes a little bit with this, but this is also a bit oversimplified. It's never this clean, right? And to be honest, like I use this to show people how we think we work. And then we have this slide of how we actually work. It gets really messy, and you're definitely going to be experiencing this if you haven't done so with your global dining experience already. And design thinking is also much more than just a process. If you think about it, if you take a group of engineers and have them go through a same process, and maybe take like a group of artists and have them go through the same process, you're probably going to be getting very drastically different results, right? So I actually really like this framework that expands beyond the process, where it's not just the process, it's also the people, it's also the place. And whenever I'm invited to do keynotes and whatnot, I actually dive into each of these, but I don't want to share too much because I feel like the experience you're about to get into is about finding your own design thinking in the next 9 months. So good luck with that one. Last tidbit on design thinking. Something I've been thinking about recently is just, or actually the last 10 years is, why is design thinking so popular? Why do you see so many books about it and articles and so many consultancies and so many LinkedIn profiles writing that they're design thinking experts? And my theory, not proven, just a hypothesis, is that we live in a world where we have so much stuff, so much products that all the easy things we can make that sells or that people need are taken. And we need a new approach to coming up with innovation to reach those high fruits, to see those unexpected insights, or to come up with something that people didn't expect. It's not no longer like this moment of brilliance or just like trying to make something fairly obvious, like a machine that cools food. Like that's a fairly obvious thing to do, right? Anyways, that's my hypothesis. Let's move on. So ME310, some of you have heard about it. Some of your programs may be named after it. Some of you probably have no idea what this is about. It is a program at Stanford that started in the 1960s that served to be the inspiration or the origin of the sugar network. And I'll get into that as well. A lot of what I'm talking about here is based off of an actual book that got published a couple years ago to recap the 50 years of, they call it Redesign, but 50 years of the ME310 program at Stanford. And fortunate for us, the person who edited this, Tamara, I believe is the keynote speaker at the last day of the GKO, and Maya's giving me a thumbs up, so I'm correct on that one. Anyways, what was interesting reading into this was that, you notice how it says 1967? Their logo says 1969. So even the program itself is not particularly good about keeping its own history. And to be honest, we're designers, not historians. But the ME part of ME310 actually stands for mechanical engineering. It's a program or a course in the mechanical engineering department, and 310 is a course number. It actually started in 1967 when a professor called Jim Adams came, and he was very frustrated between the disconnect in how industry practices engineering and how students are trained to be engineers. Both this gap of theory and how to cover things that weren't so easy to explain just by telling people. And that's why he wanted to have more of these hands-on things to teach things like innovation, but also reliability, where it's fairly obvious now, right? Back then it was actually a relatively new concept, but this now project-based learning thing has taken over the world. And as with many things, ME310 was at the beginning of that. But your compatriots back then, this is what they look like. They were wearing ties to class. I was looking at this and be like, man, it is retro. And also the project they're working on are very different. Redesigning the cable car grip for the San Francisco cable car system, or how to handle film. I'm guessing we have students now that have never actually used film before. And I would love to actually see a raise of hands, but we can't do that on Zoom. Anyways, let's fast forward a little bit. 1980s comes this professor, Larry Leifer, who's really, well, he's actually teaching it now and was this very much the forefather of this global movement that the sugar is part of. By the way, fun fact, he was the PhD advisor for David Kelly. First PhD advisor, didn't finish. And they were very much at the forefront of experimenting with new technology and how that could support design or help designers connect with people and whatnot. And one of, like in the 90s, they were experimenting how the internet could connect people with these terrible videos to maybe do design together or teach class. 20 years later, we have Zoom, and now we're on the cloud. But one of the things that his research was showing that the diversity of students, which is very much the core principle of Sugar now, correlated very strongly with team performance with regards to breakthrough innovation. And how can you get more diverse than having students from two different universities in completely different country, cultural context working on a project? And that's when he started running experiments in 2000s to say, hey, let's try to match our students together to work on this 9-month project for something. And that's where I end up stepping into the picture. I took the program in 2004, 2005. We had, of the 10 projects, I think 4 or 5 had global partners. So it was not a normal thing at all. We had no kickoff. In fact, we got connected in January with one email saying, say Sushi or team at Stanford, like, your guys are now going to be working with these students from TU München or TUM. Please coordinate and get them up to date on the project. That was it. And we're like, okay, email back and forth, and kind of got on page. 2000, was it not changing screens? Oh, there it is. 2006 was the first year that all the projects were global at Stanford. And from the picture, you can see that there are a lot of Germans, some Japanese, not KIT, but, and a lot of Finns involved. 2007, this was the time I wasn't involved. 2007 was the first time this global kickoff happened at Stanford. It was small enough that they could actually hold it in their loft. And well, you might have heard about the paper bike activity. That was the first time this global paper bike challenge, which was Polo, was conducted. And wow, my computer's slowing down. Since then, yeah, ME310 has persisted. They've been working on tons of different projects, and it amazes me how much Larry and Mark Kosky, the other professor, has been really just energetic in keeping this program going. And now I'm just kind of showing you a lot of the project teams, but they've been very much at the forefront of experimenting with design methodologies and also this global collaboration. I talked to Larry fairly recently, but I interviewed him a couple of years ago. I think he's like 80 years old. By the way, without him, there is absolutely no reason or no way sugar would exist. Like, he was the one who was very much started this whole global movement, and he's still very active at his age as well. And I must say, some of this movement is now going into other places as well. Maybe some of your universities might have other projects that are globally distributed where students are working with other universities. The PDP program at Alto, which was very much a sort of local project, has been going global for the last couple of years. I don't know the details so much. I think Christine can tell you if you're curious, but the CBI challenge based off of CERN, the nuclear research facility in Switzerland, they are now running these CBI challenge-based innovations, which are also globally distributed as well. And I'm not surprised because the founder of the program is also a ME310 alumni. And last but not the least, the project topics have significantly changed over the years, which is really cool to see, because for a lot of programs or projects, there's not that much change because the professors grow older and they keep trying to do the same thing over and over. But the cool thing about having all these corporate defined projects is that the program gets to adjust to the generation. So the mechanical engineering has always been at the core of it. But I would say from the 80s, 90s, Larry keeps saying that the 90s was the hot era for smart products when you got mechatronics coming into it. Around 2000s, we started seeing software. I think like a year after me was the first time we had I would say a project where it was more software development than mechanical engineering. And around, I want to say I was looking at all the old brochures of the projects, and around 2007, they got significantly better, like as in it didn't look like an engineer designed it. And then I realized that it's around that time when Aalto University became a regular member of the network and started bringing in their industrial design students who couldn't bear that all these boxy pamphlets were being made by engineers who had no sense of dimension and grid and things like that. And I would say in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot more service-oriented projects coming up. And I would say maybe the last couple of years, the hot topics have become AI and autonomous driving. Who knows what's going to be coming up next? So I think we're making good time. Last chapter of my talk, the sugar network. So you got a little bit of the history of the sugar network from Falk, and I had no idea he was going to do that. So I apologize for a little bit of the overlap. But there's actually kind of an official and unofficial way to see the sugar network, both the network as well as the beginning of it as well. And, oh, right, Maya wanted me to tell you that this is the old logo of Sugar. Please use the new one, which you can see in her corner right here, if you can see her as well. But anyways, the official definition taken from the website, as you can see, is the network of universities and students that work with companies to develop human-centered innovation and innovators for the future, which you're used to seeing. The other unofficial definition, which some of you may be aware of, is it's the projects that don't involve Stanford. And this is where, you know, the Facebook status of like the relationship, it's complicated. It's a little bit like that right now because Stanford's not part of the sugar network technically. So for universities that actually have projects with Stanford and with other universities in the sugar network, there's this unofficial thing where the projects with like others in the sugar network are sugar projects. Projects with Stanford are ME310 projects. In the end, we treat it the same. Like I think this year, Mannheim, HPI, I think you guys have projects, so you might be aware of this, where some universities are probably looking at this and be like, okay, didn't know about that at all. We don't have any ME310 projects, but because we've been involved before the official sugar founding, like we call ourselves ME310 Sugar in Japan, just to cover both bases. Anyways, the unofficial start of sugar, or when non-Stanford projects started jumping in, was 2009 when we had 3 projects where non-Stanford projects were there. And 2 were kind of officially set up between ENPC Paris, the forerunner of D-School Paris, and Aalto University. This was the first year I moved to Paris, and I was talking with a professor from Aalto saying like, hey, Stanford can only handle so many projects. Let's do some between ourselves. And Vroni Killen, who was the one who brought me to Paris, managed to get projects to run with Finns as well. And it really looked like another 310 project that just didn't have Stanford students involved. And we kind of jumped into their kickoff workshop. Stanford was fine with it. It was just a couple extra students. It wasn't really much of an issue. That's the cleaner one. The other kind of messy sugar project that started back in 2009 was actually between the university I teach at now, Kyoto Institute of Technology, and Aalto University. And I don't know how small that looks on your screen, but you see that there's actually no professor from the Kyoto Institute of Technology involved this year. It's only students. Aalto University used to have this instructor for like 10 years called Larry Repokari, one of the craziest people I've known and probably one of the most amazing innovators in an academic sense. He was running ME310 at that point in Aalto, and he had this issue that he had one extra project that there just was no university capable of handling it. Like Paris had not enough students, Stanford was completely booked out. So he found an exchange student from the Kyoto Institute of Technology from Japan called Riku and say, hey, could you arrange a team in Japan of your friends to work on this project with us? Enrico was like, sure, I can try, but can I join the project? And of course, he's like, yes. And then he actually goes back and just Skypes his friends back in Japan and say like, hey, do you want to jump into this project that we're going to Stanford for? And we're going to be working with Alto people. I don't think the people fully realized like what they were getting into, but a couple innovators said, hey, why not? We'll give it a try. And they joined. And then of course, the next thing Lowry says is, great, tell them to come to California next week for the kickoff workshop. We'll figure out a way to pay them back later. And of course, they were like, what? But it actually worked out. And I was there at the kickoff workshop with these slightly confused Japanese students that came from Japan, not knowing what to expect. They actually managed to build a paper bike in a week as well. And as one of the first sugar projects, they managed to get through as well. So that was kind of the unofficial beginning of sugar. The official one is closer to what Falk mentioned, that it was started in 2011. And this was the year when sugar was really, really growing. This is hearsay, by the way. I wasn't involved around this year. And my understanding is that this year they had too many students they wanted to bring to the Stanford kickoff, that Stanford kind of said, sorry, we can't handle it anymore. But Falk kind of promised both the students and the people that were working with them that they would be going to Palo Alto for it. So he just rented out a hotel right outside of Stanford and held a separate kickoff, which became known as the Sugar Kickoff. And it was very much his attitude of, yeah, let's just do it. A couple years after that, they kind of come together, separated, come together for a while. 2016, or actually we did in 2017, but it was academic year 2016, we were separate again. And sugar just kept growing the last 10 years that it became impossible to do it in Stanford campus. This was like in a conference hall in San Francisco. This was 2018 was the first year we went abroad. And we had the global kickoff hosted at the University of Science and Technology, China, in a small town called Hefei of 7 million people. That was very, very interesting doing it somewhere other than Silicon Valley because we were so used to doing it there. And of course, that brings us to 2020, which is the first time we're here. Now we're on the cloud thanks to the coronavirus pandemic. Who knows, maybe we'll do it in the moon one of these days. But looking back, man, we have grown over the years. I just kind of was looking back to see when all these universities started joining. And I know some of you have noticed on the chat that there's this little spat going on between Kyoto Institute of Technology and Karlsruhe Institute of Technology on who the real KIT is. This is the slide to prove that Kyoto Institute of Technology was there first and therefore is the real KIT, and Gerhard cannot no longer argue with me. So the big question has been, is that where is Stanford kind of in all of this? It's a little bit weird right now. I don't know how well you guys know your history, but it's kind of like in the 1910s or 20s when the United States started the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations, but then didn't join themselves. Stanford was very much kind of at the inspiration and the forefront of starting the Sugar Network. But once it started, they haven't particularly been paying too much or joining so much of the programs. They have their own kickoff and their own expo. But very much like the philosophy and the way we approach the program is similar. So I would say spiritually they're here right now, but physically they're a little bit disconnected from it. And one more thing, channeling my little inner Steve Jobs here. Falk also spilled a little bit of the beans as well, but why sugar? And where did the cheer come from? So I must say, I did not expect that we were going to be doing the sugar chat the sugar cry on the chat. I thought it would actually be really cool to do it all over Zoom, but maybe it might crash it. But this is how it goes. Everyone comes together, goes 3, 2, 1, sugar. And we do this all together. I know that looked ridiculous because it was just me doing it. But that's the cheer. And I need to say that because this is where it comes from. And I have video. Azúcar. Azúcar. Yeah, seriously, this is the video that shows where the origin of the term sugar comes from. And here's the behind the scenes story as much as I can put together. This is where Falconized memory or recollection differs a little bit, because my understanding was that it wasn't Carlos Serrano, it was Maria Fernanda Camacho who was the origin of this, but they're husband and wife, so it might have been like them together. But the point is not the people involved, but the conversation that happened. So back in 2008, Larry was thinking of actually like creating a network of these universities, and he was kind of like playing around with the name. And he got the S for Stanford, U for University, G for Global, A for Alliance, and he was like, what could we do with this? And this triggered Maria, or maybe Carlos, about the Azucar scream that you just watched by Celia Cruz, the Cuban diva, which means sugar. And sure enough, 4 of the letters were there. And of course, she shows the video to Larry, and he's like, oh, we could make this our war cheer or our scream. So then they try it. 3, 2, 1, sugar, that you'll be doing, I'm sure, at Expo as well. And so the sugar cry was born. And then you have to ask yourself, like, what does it actually mean? And Larry's like, all right, we got the SUGA, R, it's not quite design. But all design is redesign. So let's just say Sugar University Global Alliance for Redesign. And that was kind of the name that got backronymed onto it, like forced onto it. So you heard it here. Sugar means Stanford University Global Alliance for Redesign. Oh, but wait, no, it's not so easy. Here's a small part. Stanford University is not officially part of the Sugar Network as of now, and as the governing body of the university has not approved its joining. Stanford University is a registered trademark and cannot be used without the consent of Stanford University, which of course it has not granted to the Sugar Network. So we could not say Sugar actually is Stanford University, and therefore Sugar remains Sugar. So please don't go around like putting into your LinkedIn profile that because you're part of this program, you also have a degree from Stanford. We have actually seen students do that in the past a little bit. And if someone calls you out on it, that's going to be a little bit problematic. Enough already, enough history lessons, right? Let's move into the future. It's your guys' turn. Go make the future and good luck with your sugar adventure. And I've kept it under 45 minutes. Back to you, Daniele.
Okay, great, thank you.